Welcome to Go and Do, folks. I'm your host, Ajalon Joy Stapley, and I recently learned that the human nose does not stop growing. If you're only listening, you can't see why that is troubling for me. Here at Go and Do, we talk about politics, culture, family, and faith from a pro America, faith sustaining Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints perspective. And I want to thank you for being here. This is part 3 of our 4-part series on how wokeism is Marxism, repackaged, recycled, and ready to take down the West. Now, I also want to congratulate you for being here because I am assuming you have been through part 1 and part 2 of this 4-part series. And I got to tell you, it was not light, it was not short. And today is not going to be much different. It's going to be a little less heavy, a little less on the death and destruction. But still, this is a heavy topic. And then when we get into the 4th and final installment of this 4-part series, it's a doozy. You got to be in it for the long haul. But I thank you for being here because it shows that you are serious students. You want to learn and understand what is going on in the world today, what is going on in our country, and I am here for it. I am excited to teach the things that I have learned over the years, my insights, my aha moments. I'm here for it. So, if you have not seen the first 2 parts of this 4-part series, I suggest you do. We looked at the birth of Marxism and how it is a faux religion more than just an economic system. We saw that through the disaffected, secular, wealthy, intellectual crowd, this ideology was spread to Russia. We saw the destruction it took on Russia and the Russian people, how they targeted religion and the nuclear family. We saw those same disaffected, secular intellectual types take this to Asia, where Pol Pot and Mao Zedong used some pretty sadistic tactics to get people, particularly young people, to fall in line with what the party was teaching and to turn on their fellow citizens. Today, we go back to Russia. We are going to look at the Cold War between the Soviets and the US. We're going to look at the birth of the UN and how the United Nations is not necessarily, they're not doing what they were set up to do. And then we're going to look at some whistleblowers. I'm excited about this. These are whistleblowers who have spoken out about the espionage going on in America from the communists, but also the propaganda war that the communists have taken against Americans. So, buckle up. So, the UN has been in the news lately, particularly UNRWA. That stands for United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees. Yeah, those guys. What do you know about the UN? We're going to learn some stuff today, and sadly, what I have read about is that the UN's kind of a joke. Now, the Cold War has not been in the news, and in case you forgot or weren't paying attention in social studies, you see during this time period just how committed the communists are to their cause and spreading it around the world, whether it's by force or through espionage and propaganda. So today, I want you to pay attention as we go through this. To pay attention to those things, how devoted they are, how are they spreading this, and to what lengths are they taking to spread it. The Cold War is defined as a period of global geopolitical tension and struggle for ideological and economic influence between the US and the Soviets. It started 2 years after World War II ended and lasted until 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed. It's called a Cold War because these two sides never actually engaged in fighting with each other, but they did support different sides of major regional conflicts and proxy wars. There was the nuclear arms race and, of course, the space race. So let's go back in time a little bit. Russia was taken over by the Bolshevik Party, or the Marxists, in 1917, created this communist regime, and the United States didn't recognize this new government for quite some time. It wasn't until the USSR, or I'm sorry, it wasn't until 1933 that the US finally extended recognition to the Soviets under one condition. Guess what that condition was? Can you guess? It was under the under the condition or the premise that the Soviets would not permit any Russian group to agitate the US. Yes, they failed to do that. But this is important to understand because it shows just how much the US government and the US people underestimate um, the Russian people or communist in general. And they had some leeway because this was a brand new thing back then. But today, not so much. So during World War II, Russia and Germany, or Stalin and Hitler, were enemies. Now remember, this isn't because one was bad and one was good. They're both bad. They both have the same end goal, which is world domination. It's just different means, just different avenues on how to get there. Hitler rose to power in Germany in the 1930s. He was an extreme nationalist and believed that it was in Germany's best interest to define what being German meant. And as you already know, that meant to be a member of the Aryan race. And anyone not a part of that race was undesirable or was a threat. So Hitler is seen as the bad guy of World War II. Now, don't get me wrong, he is clearly a monstrous bad guy, but he's not the only one. Hitler and Stalin signed a pact in 1939 that Stalin would not move on Germany as they invaded Europe. Okay, it was a non-aggression pact. So Germany wanted to take over Poland, which was right on the border of the Soviet states. And so Hitler and Stalin signed this pact that Stalin would not attack Germany if they attacked Poland or other countries in Europe. Immediately after this, Nazis just rolled right into Poland. And this wasn't because Stalin was a pacifist who just, didn't want to be a part of the war.
I never wipe my tears away. I'm not ashamed of them. I wear them proudly, like small, wet, salty badges of emotional truth.
If you recall, from the get-go, Lenin, the first communist leader in Russia, stated how world domination was the goal. Stalin was no different. So his strategy here was to just let Europe kind of destroy itself. Let them fight one another, let them deplete their resources, and then when they are just at the tipping point, he would just come in and take over. And he did just that. As Hitler rolled into country after country, Stalin just waited. By 1941, there were only two major capitalist countries who had yet to join the war, the US and Japan. So what did Stalin do? Well, he signed a non-aggression pact with Japan, just like he had done with Hitler. So if you recall from the last episode, during this time, Japan had invaded China. Remember, China was going through their big civil war where you had the communists and the nationalists, and they were fighting for like 20 years, but they stopped and formed an alliance for a few years to fight Japan. This is during that time. So Japan had invaded China. They also officially aligned themselves with Germany and Italy to create the Axis powers. And this new non-aggression pact with Stalin allowed them the freedom to attack other people in the Pacific and not worry about Russia interfering. Okay? So this sets the stage. This is Stalin's plan. And then Hitler abandoned the pact.
I did not see that coming.
In 1941, and this threw Russia into the war. Now, this is key because now Russia is fighting who? Hitler, the Nazis, the big bad fascist, okay? Which they are bad, don't get me wrong, but now that Russia is fighting the fascists, Russia now becomes a good guy, okay? Americans are cheering them on, understandably, because at this time in history, it's not communism taking over the world, it's Nazism. Then Japan attacked the US in December of 1941 at Pearl Harbor, and then this thrust America into the war. So now America joins the Allied parties, or the Allied powers, which is Great Britain, France, Russia, and now the US. So now Russia's on the good side, okay? America began something called the Land Lease Program, which, tell me if this sounds familiar, oh, tell me if this sounds familiar. From 1941 to 1945, they gave them a whole bunch of stuff to help in their war efforts. Gave them tanks, planes, food, cotton, petroleum, Jeeps, all sorts of things. It totaled back then $11.3 billion in goods and services. If you were to look at that today, it would equal about $180 billion. Give you some comparison. Over the past decade, we've given Ukraine about $136 billion in aid. And how did they thank us? Well, they tried to steal our secrets.
That's why her hair is so big. It's full of secrets.
Throughout World War II, Russia tried to secure secrets to the atomic bomb, as well as other military and industrial information. They were quite successful at this. And how they did this is the Soviets recruited Americans and British citizens to spy. They found people who were sympathetic to the cause and placed them in places to extract this information. Spies penetrated the Manhattan Project in Los Alamos, New Mexico. This is what the film Oppenheimer was based on, as well as several other locations. They sent Russia a lot of critical information that helped speed up the development of the Soviet bomb. Interestingly, many of these spies were not prosecuted because they didn't have enough evidence at the time. So they found evidence later, but at the time they didn't have enough. So a lot of these spies still lived in the US freely, a couple of them teaching at universities. Put a pin in that. So now Russia is able to catapult herself as this world power because of the stuff they either stole from America or were given by America. Immediately after World War II, in 1945, the United Nations was created. The primary purpose of the UN was to prevent future wars by addressing international disputes peacefully and promoting cooperation between the nations. Okay, that's a great idea. It's understandable. The world has just been rocked by not one but two major global conflicts. They allowed Russia to be a full participant. So close. At the UN, they have something called the Security Council, where there's 5 permanent members who are all allowed veto powers. So who was on this Security Council? The US, Britain, France, China, and Russia. Article 4 of the Charter states that the UN is restricted to peace-loving states. That's still in there today. But immediately after World War II, the Soviets were not shy about sharing their goal of world domination. And not just Soviet communists, but communists all over the world, including in America. This was their mission, and they were not hiding it. In 1945, right after World War II, 1946, the communist leader of Yugoslavia said this regarding their collaboration with capitalist nations in World War II. He said, "Our collaboration with capitalism during the war, which recently ended, by no means signifies that we shall prolong our alliance with it in the future. On the contrary, the capitalistic forces constitute our natural enemy, despite the fact that they helped us to defeat their most dangerous representative." So I'm just going to pause on that real fast. So helped us to defeat their most dangerous representative. This is the big ideological difference between communists and fascists. Okay, if you recall from the first part of this series, communism looks at capitalism as the enemy. Okay, in the worldview, that is capitalism and all that it represents. All who benefit from it are evil. That's their big thing. Fascism uses capitalism, it uses enterprise for its gain. So complete government control. There's no free market like what America was founded on. There's no free market in fascism, but there is capitalism, and it's very much directed by the state. So when communists look at fascism, they look at Hitler, they saw that as the worst example of capitalism, okay, because he used that to push his agenda forward, to push power uh, onto neighboring countries. As we looked, though, in the first part of the series, fascism is not really a left or a right wing system. It's more of a left wing system because of how much government control it allows. Okay. Free market, constitutional, small government. That's what America was founded on. That's what conservatives like myself support. Fascism is use the market, get in bed with businesses, and use it to push your agenda. So that's why the communists didn't like the fascist. Okay, so he says this. It may happen that we shall again decide to make use of their aid, capitalist nations, America, but always with the sole aim of accelerating their final ruin. Okay, they're not hiding it, guys. So Stalin had 3 techniques to expand communism at this time. First was to create pro-communist governments. Second, military conquest. And third, further infiltration of free countries by espionage and propaganda. Okay, so after World War II, Russia occupied Eastern Europe, pretty much Poland, Romania, Bulgaria. He continued to spread communism in this area, and this created what we know as the Iron Curtain. It is this imaginary line dividing Europe between Soviet influence and Western influence. You can see Germany is split right down the middle, and what they did with Germany is they split it between the 4 allied powers. So US, Britain, France, and Russia each got a section, and the entire purpose was for them to oversee the rebuilding of that part of the country. Russia did not do this. He turned East Germany into a communist state. People fled for the West, and his entire tactic of doing this was to spread his ideology, but also to keep Germany divided and weakened so that it was no longer a threat to them. They also split the capital city of Berlin. It's kind of interesting, right? Because it's kind of right over there in East Germany, but it was the capital, so they split it between the 4 countries. And to keep people from escaping out of East Berlin, they put up the wall, the Berlin Wall, in 1961, and it did not fall until 1989. And if you need a better example of what communism or socialist policies do to a nation or a people compared to what capitalism does to a nation or a people, look at this example. And I say this because communism is still around. There is a communist party in America. I watched students in, I think it was Michigan. They just straight up all the gear, all the communist gear, marching for anti-capitalist policies. Okay. I've seen several TikToks. I've watched, I've read people who attribute basically any ailment in our society to capitalism. This is our capitalistic society, right? If you need an example of how wrong that is, look at West Germany versus East Germany. No one was trying to get into East Germany. Okay, no one's scaling the walls, risking their life to get into East Germany because it was a hellhole. West Germany was a prosperous democratic state, while East Germany was an authoritarian communist state whose economy stagnated, and they had a lot of ugly buildings. We're going to move on to Korea. We're going to do some cliff notes over in Korea. I know we talked about Asia last time, but it fits more into this topic today. If you're like me, growing up, you learned about World War I, World War II, there's something else, and then the Vietnam War. Okay, that something else is the Korean War, and it has to do with communism. And the reason it fits in today's topic better is that there are some alleged interferences with pro-communist sympathizers in the United Nations and at the US government that played a part in what happened in the Korean War. So, Korea Peninsula had been a colony of Japan's for a few decades. After World War II, 1945, they split the peninsula just like they had split Germany. And the US was in charge of the South, the Soviets were in charge of the North. And again, the intent was to help rebuild. It was intended to be a temporary situation. And you guessed it, Russia did not keep to this. In 1950, the North Koreans, equipped and trained by the Soviets, launched an invasion in South Korea. The United Nations Security Council denounced the attack. They recommended that countries go in to help repel the invasion, right? This was still in the building up phase after World War II. And Russia was not present during that, so they couldn't veto this. So 21 countries comprised what was called the UN forces or UN troops. However, Americans made up about 90% of the military personnel. So things were going pretty well for these UN troops. They were led by an American general when 1 million communist Chinese forces came in. Okay. It was ugly. And now this is where things get kind of messy. General MacArthur was very restricted on what he could do and how he could retaliate. Cleon Skousen, in his book, The Naked Communist, makes the accusation that it was communist sympathizers in the UN and the State Department that had influenced the White House to basically share with China what those restrictions were. And then that's when China attacked. General MacArthur spoke out about this and wrote a letter about these damning effects of these policies. He was not happy. General MacArthur spoke out about it, relieved from duty, sent back to the US. He actually gave a speech in Congress after he was relieved of his duties about this situation, because understandably he was not happy. The other side of this argument is that General MacArthur disobeyed orders and was non-compliant with his superiors, which is a big deal in the military. So that's the one side that I've seen. And then the other side is that he got screwed over. So either way, it's a very scary situation for the people in South Korea. It's a scary situation for the troops there. It's just an ugly, ugly scenario. Thankfully, Joseph Stalin died in 1953, and that spurred negotiations, and it ended relatively quickly. So, Korea today. Again, if you want to see the horrible effects of capitalism versus the wonderful, marvelous effects of communism, look no further than North and South Korea. Okay, North Korea is a Stalinist state accused of holding hundreds of thousands of its own people, including kids, in prison camps. It has received the lowest rating of press freedom and government accountability. It's reported over a third of their population is malnourished. They use their own feces as fertilizer. Yes, that's not made up. I've heard stories from defectors saying that they collect their own stuff and they fertilize crops. So look, here is an article from CNN about a defected North Korean soldier who was found to have parasitic worms in his system, 11 inches long, from that, because of this practice. South Korea, on the other hand, is a flourishing capitalistic society. It has a constitutional democracy. Some more differences between the two countries. North Korea bans really any religious activity or expression. Bibles and other religious items are not allowed. No weapons are allowed. Any media from South Korea, so like your K-pop groups or your Korean soaps.
Open Gangnam Style.
None of that is allowed to be seen in North Korea. Horrible, horrible place to live. And communism did that. Now, back to Russia.
This is our big problem in the Russian space station.
Well, Hungary, actually. So, 1956, we see a Hungarian uprising. Hungary had been under communist occupation for about a decade at this point. And, their economy was nationalized, which resulted in a weaker economy, supply shortages, low incomes, tortures, arrests, executions, the usual. So this uprising started in 1956, and it only lasted a matter of days. It started with some students, college students, and then spread nationwide, where lots of Hungarians were taking up arms to fight back. And they were doing really well. They actually had the upper hand, and a ceasefire was called. The Soviets agreed to peace talks. An entire delegation of Hungarians arrived. And when they did, the Soviets attacked them, arrested them, and they were never heard from again. And then the military just attacked civilians. They killed a couple thousand, a couple 100,000 fled the country. Just horrible. Back at the UN, remember the 5 members of the Security Council who all hold vetoing powers? The US, Britain, France, China, and Russia. Well, after this, the US introduced a resolution to censure Russia for these atrocious attacks and called for their immediate removal out of Hungary. Russia vetoed it. A resolution was later passed at the General Assembly, where Russia has no vetoing powers, to investigate what happened, which they did, but nothing came of it. Russia was never held accountable. It was kind of just swept under the rug. And the UN did nothing against Russia for the human rights abuses that they were committing. And not only that, but there are also some very shady things going on at the UN. There was a Danish diplomat. That means he's from Denmark, in case you didn't know. I didn't know. I had to look it up. Okay, it gets confusing. Danish means you're from Denmark. Dutch means you're from the Netherlands. And then there's Holland that isn't even a country, it's a region. It gets confusing. So just so you know. So a diplomat from Denmark was a part of the committee who collected eyewitness accounts and statements about what happened in Hungary. He was pressured by his superiors at the UN to hand over the list of 81 witnesses that he had acquired. He refused to do this because he didn't want that info leaked to the Soviets and any of these people or their families to be harmed. His bosses at the UN launched disciplinary proceedings against him and then removed him from his post. He was then found in a park in New York City with a gunshot to the head and a suicide note. He did not commit suicide. So these are the links that communists go to maintain power. So now it's the 1960s, and tensions are growing between the Soviets and the Americans during the midst of this Cold War. The actual event was a plane with 6 crew members. 4 died in the plane crash, and 2 were taken hostage into Russia. So Russia claimed that the U.S. plane was in their territory, and therefore they were justified to shoot it down. The U.S. said that they had intel that proved otherwise, and they demanded that the UN do an impartial investigation. The request was referred to the Security Council. Russia vetoed it. There was a motion to let the International Red Cross go in and meet with the hostages just to make sure they were okay. Russia vetoed it. If you feel like pounding your head against the wall right now, that's normal. That just means you're sane. That just means you possess some common sense. According to Time magazine, by 1962, Russia resorted to their veto powers 99 times. The other members of the Security Council, they used their veto powers a combined total of 7 times. As of 2024, Russia had used its veto powers 129 times, the UK 29, China 19, France 16, and the US 87. Now I know what you're thinking. Well, Russia used it 129 times, 87 is not too far behind, but 49 of those times was used to protect Israel. Speaking of Israel, the US, and the UN, years ago I read the book Millennial Messiah by Bruce R. McConkie, and a part that stuck out to me then and always stayed with me was he explained that in the last days, it would be Israel and the United States against the whole world. That was really difficult to fathom at that time. I couldn't wrap my head around a situation where that was what the world looked like. Now, fast forward to October 7th, 2023, and it's easy to see that now. There have been countless attacks against Jews, targeted against Jews, violence, graffiti. I was just reading about how in Australia, a synagogue was lit on fire with people in it. If you're not following, we are very much in Holocaust 2.0. It's not an exaggeration. I'll put some links below the video. It's weekly. There's something going on in America or some part of the world where Jews are being harassed, intimidated, or attacked. But when I read this book, that was hard to imagine. And then about 5 years ago, I read Nikki Haley's autobiography, where she talks about her time as the United States ambassador at the UN under Trump's first presidency. And she talked about this in the beginnings of that book. She said, while she was at the UN, she was often on the losing end of a vote meant to trash either the US or Israel. The vote tally, 189 to 2. I got goosebumps when I read that. One last illustration of what a joke the UN is. So in her book, Nikki Haley talks about the Human Rights Council, which is responsible for monitoring human rights abuse across the world. And in 2017, when she was there, the countries who were included on this council were China, Cuba, Rwanda, Saudi Arabia, which at this time, the Saudi Arabian government had just assassinated one of its own journalists, and the Congo.
What a load of crappy crap.
Now on to the whistleblowers. Okay, this is real James Bond type of stuff. So the Cold War had no shortages of spies, and thankfully some of them defected and have spoken up. So the first was a woman named Elizabeth Bentley. She was an American citizen. She was considered a spy master from 1938 to 1945. She was a member of the Communist Party in the US and was recruited by the Soviets to go underground and become a spy. And she was responsible to kind of manage several highly placed moles who worked within, wait for it, the United States federal government. So she was in charge of these multiple moles and getting the information from them, coordinating the information that they were stealing and sending it to the Soviets. She testified before Congress when she defected and exposed 2 spy networks and ultimately accused more than 80 American citizens of both treason and espionage. Okay, that's some big stuff there. The next whistleblower was a man named Whittaker Chambers. And Whittaker Chambers was an American writer, journalist. He joined the Communist Party And when I say the Communist Party, I mean the official registered Communist Party here in the United States. You could do that. It's just like a party like Republicans or Democrats. So he joined the US Communist Party and then was recruited by Soviets to work as a spy. That is what he did from 1932 to 1938. He worked as a spy. And he details his experience in this book right here. Lots and lots of details. And it's important to learn about that kind of stuff, to see what would draw this normal kid from Long Island to work for this foreign nation, to spy on his own country, to take it down. That's the end goal for the communists. It's to overthrow America and to rebuild. In his book, he talks about why that was. And it reminded me of Thomas Sowell. If you haven't heard about Thomas Sowell, you should. He is an icon for conservatives. He's 91, 92. So for 60 years, he's been writing books and articles about his research. And his research basically disproves every left-wing talking point. That's not an exaggeration. Every left-wing talking point about government intervention and government assistance, and I mean, from race to gender, all these things, he has disproven it in his like 30 books that he's written. And he's done it with facts and studies and statistics and evidence. He's studied cultures all over the world, countries all over the world, and has found basically the same thing, that when the government helps, it doesn't go well. So, but Thomas Sowell was a Marxist when he was younger, okay? He talks about growing up in Harlem in the 30s and 40s and riding the city bus as a young man, driving through Manhattan and seeing these glistening buildings and beautiful cars and this environment that was very different than what he would see as he drove into Harlem. And he explains that he didn't have an explanation for that. And so Marxism provided that explanation. And that's important for us as conservatives, for constitutionalists, for Christians, and those of us who are religious, to recognize that people want answers, they want explanations, and they will go and search it out. And when they find something that they think answers it, they're going to hold on to that. And so for Thomas Sowell, Marx offered that solution, and he was a pretty devout Marxist in his 20s. The thing that actually converted him away from that and into conservatism was he interned one summer for the Department of Labor and saw what he described as that government was basically an entity out to sustain itself. So that's Thomas Sowell. But back to Whittaker Chambers. Whittaker Chambers grew up during World War I, and he saw the devastation in his world here in America, as well as reading about what was going on around the world. And he was looking for the answer to the obvious question of why. Why are there disparities? Why is there devastation? Why are there inequalities? Why? And for him, communism filled that. So it's a good reminder for us that we need to be more assertive, more outspoken. We need to share. Why do we believe the things we do? What are the answers that we see, so that people don't turn to this? So Whittaker Chambers defected from the Soviet underground. He corroborated Elizabeth Bentley's testimony, and they both named a man named Alger Hiss. And this is important because Alger Hiss was a very connected bureaucrat working within the federal government. He was well educated. He had been a former government lawyer under FDR. He worked as an official in the State Department, helped create the United Nations. He wasn't just some schlepp federal worker. He had a lot of influence. And Chambers testified about his own spy activities. He was a courier, so he would meet these different, he actually would meet with Alger Hiss. I don't think he met with other moles per se, but Alger would get him microfilms and documents and other things that had been stolen from the government. And then Whittaker Chambers would take it and just kind of move it along until it got to the Soviet Union. So he named Alger Hiss and about a dozen other government officials. Just listen to where these government officials were placed. Okay, these are people who Whittaker Chambers, a spy for the Soviets, named were other spies or moles working for the Soviets. This is during the 30s. The 30s. Chief counsel to a senator, an office manager to a representative, an attorney in the agriculture department, an employee at the Department of State, someone who worked at the Treasury. And I thought it was interesting, about half of these people that he named work for the Department of Agriculture. And if you are familiar with your LDS history, conservative history, you know that President Ezra Taft Benson, prophet and president of the church, who I quoted a couple episodes ago, was extremely outspoken critic of communism, warning the saints to be informed and prepared for what this counterfeit ideology was doing to the world. Okay. He worked as the Secretary of Agriculture under Dwight D. Eisenhower from 1953 to 1961. So it was a little bit after this time period, but I thought it was interesting because I wonder, did he see something? Did he hear things? Did he know some things that kind of contributed to his just sounding the war cry for decades about communism and socialism? So after some drawn out dramatic proceedings, there was enough evidence that proved that Alger Hiss, this man who was in very high positions of influence in the federal government, was in fact a spy for the Soviets. American citizen, was a spy.
He's a communist.
Next whistleblower, Bella Dodd. Bella Dodd was a college professor turned union activist turned communist, which I have seen is a kind of a common route. She said she was attracted to the Communist Party because because they were the ones fighting fascism. She testified before congressional committees and explained that she was doing this just like all of her other fellow communists. They were doing it because they really believed in it. She explained that she made more working at the teachers union, but it wasn't about the money. Okay. This is how devoted and committed these people are to their cause. She testified that communists had gotten into many legislative offices of Congress and into a number of groups advising the president, as well as the Office of Education at the state of New York, as well as the city of New York's Board of Education. Dodd named teachers and public intellectuals who were party members. I mean, this chick just like ripped the shiz off this whole thing. She claimed more than 1,500 teachers nationwide were members of the Communist Party, and that the party specifically recruited teachers, but kept their participation secretive. This next part is fascinating. She explained that she was part of she headed up a special operation to infiltrate the Catholic Church from within. She said she personally placed 1,100 men into the priesthood in order to weaken the Catholic Church from within. The idea was for these men to be ordained and progress to positions of influence, and that of all the world's religion, the Catholic Church was the only one that the communists feared. So that's why they singled them out. So this is not me insulting Catholics or members of the Catholic faith. I know a lot of people who are wonderful, wonderful Catholics. But see if this describes your experience at church. And this can describe several Christian churches, not just the Catholic Church. It could describe people in our Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, okay? This is a direct quote from Bella Dodd, 1953. She said the whole idea was to destroy not the institution of the church, but rather the faith of the people. Once the faith was destroyed, there would be a guilt complex introduced to the church. Does that sound familiar? To label the church as being, can you guess it? Are you ready for this? Oppressive, authoritarian, prejudice. If we translate that to modern language, it would be bigoted, misogynistic, outdated, not representing marginalized communities, not speaking up on behalf of those groups who have been marginalized or oppressed. 1953. She said this would be necessary in order to shame church leaders into an openness to the world. Communists would then exploit this openness in order to undermine the church. She spent the rest of her life as a pro-Catholic, anti-communist hero in my book. So, speaking of communists attacking religion from the inside out, that takes us to something called liberation theology. And we're going to learn about in the next episode how Marxists created all these different theories or theologies to kind of infiltrate different aspects of culture and push Marxism. So, liberation theology was a popular theology within the Catholic Church in the 1960s in Latin America. The stated goal of liberation theology was that Christians are obliged to promote social justice and assist the poor. Okay, that sounds fine, right? We know as Christians that we've been taught, Christ taught to take care of the poor, feed the needy, clothe them. That's not bad, but the undeclared goal was to encourage the poor to rebel against the institutionalized violence of poverty. And you might be wondering why that's bad, right? If there's people who are making them poor, why is it bad that they stand up for themselves? Well, the point of getting the poor to rebel is so they can stir up that rage and that hatred and that envy and that blame and sow division and sow chaos so that communists can just come in and just shake things up more. They can come in and they take that unfettered emotion and they say, hey, that's your common enemy right there. That is the reason for all your problems. If we just take that down, it will solve all of these problems. We saw that in Asia. We saw that in Russia. We saw that in Cuba. Another whistleblower at this time was a man named Ian Pacepa. He's Romanian. I have no idea how to say it. Ian Pacepa was had been a member of the secret police in Romania. He's the highest ranking defector that is spoken out. He's written articles and several books. He said that liberation theology was organized by the KGB and infiltrated with communists. He also claims that the organizations of the World Peace Council and World Council of Churches is influenced, if not formed, by the KGB. Both of these organizations are active today. One man who was highly active and involved in teaching liberation theology in Latin America at this time, Helder Camara. If you watched the film from James Lindsay and Julie Beeling called Beneath Sheep's Clothing, they talk about this. That's where I first heard about this and then went and dug into it. So Helder Camara was an archbishop for the Brazilian Catholic Church. He did a lot of social and political work for the poor, which, okay, that's fine. That's good, right? Self-identified socialist, never admitted to any communist sympathies. He's quoted as having said, "When I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why they are poor, they call me a communist." Okay, that's a fair question. But when you study this and you start to see the patterns, and it's the same thing over and over and over again, you start to piece things together. And I don't have time to go into the South American revolutions. I looked into it a little bit, and what I found was there were definite parallels to what we've been talking about in these couple episodes. But I am bringing him up specifically to talk about his protege. This is a scene from Beneath Sheep's Clothing.
Influence, not just on what was happening within the Roman Catholic Church, but Helder Camara really had a great impact on another young man. This other young man was someone who was basically under the mentorship at Harvard University under Henry Kissinger, along with Zbigniew Brzezinski. This young man ended up spending some time in the favelas of Brazil, and he would state that the one man that had more impact on his life and the decisions that he would make would be Helder Camara. The man that said that was Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum.
I give you one example which for me was probably a crucial moment in my life. I traveled for the first time to Brazil. I met priest Don Helder Camara.
So there's Klaus Schwab talking about his influence with Camara, whom he met while he was in Brazil. Klaus Schwab is the founder of the World Economic Forum, WEF. You've probably heard of them. They're the guys who fly in their private jets to Switzerland to hold their annual Davos meeting. Yeah, that group right there. There you go. Bill Gates has attended. That's where we first met the wonderful Greta Thunberg. So basically, these people fly in their private jets, they meet together, and they discuss world problems, including climate change, and how they can solve all those problems. By definition, it is an international non-government organization, think tank lobbying organization, founded in 1971 by Schwab. It's funded by its 1,000-member companies. It's very, very James Bond sounding.
Can I offer an opinion?
I really think you people should find a better place to meet.
Basically suggests that they think the best way to solve problems is to get a bunch of self-selected, many are paying. At Davos itself, you have a couple thousand paying members, and then you have people who are specifically invited to go. So you have a bunch of paying members of this club and people that they specifically select to get together to solve the world's problems. So they know what people in rural Louisiana and people in urban Stockholm and people in some small fishing village in Fiji, what they all need, how to help all of them. These guys know how to do it. They are globalist. Okay, they want to see the world not on individual nations, more on a global scale. It's not good, guys. It's not good. After the recession of 2007, 2008, they pushed an initiative called Global Redesign. After COVID-19, they pushed an initiative called the Great Reset, and they view these periods of global instability as windows of opportunity to push their agendas forward. Okay, it's scary stuff there. They promote ESG. Have you heard of ESG? Stands for environmental, social, and governance. It's basically a framework used, it's a grading system used to evaluate companies based on if they are promoting and helping with social justice causes, if they're helping to fight climate change. It's a grading system, and companies want to have a good grade. They want to have a good reputation. They don't want to be, labeled as anti-social justice and, deal with those consequences. So the World Economic Forum pushes ESG. They didn't create it, they just push it. Want to know who did create it? The United Nations. One last whistleblower to cover. This is a man named Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov. Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov. All right, so he is a former KGB agent, and he predicted the downfall of America 30 years ago. That's great. That's great. He laid out this entire plan of basically psychological warfare that the Soviets had created to manipulate populations and to see results. He defected to the West. He was very popular or active during the 1980s. He wrote books, lectured. He had a chart of how they were going to accomplish this. So I'm going to show you the chart while I talk about it so you can really just soak it all in. Okay, so here's the chart. Bezmenov explained only 15% of time, money, and manpower was spent on espionage. The rest of the 85% is used for a slow process called ideological subversion, as the chart says, or as I think of it, psychological warfare. Which, if that surprises you, that sounds dramatic, that sounds a little far out there and conspiracy theorist, watch episode 3, where I talked about what happened in Cambodia and China and how this is very real. It's very much a thing. So what does this ideological subversion mean? I'm going to read you this sentence a couple times because it is just kind of a mouthful. But what it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interest of defending themselves, their families, their community, their country. I'll say it again. Change the perception of reality to the point where Americans, despite all the facts, all the truth, all of the information that is right before them, won't really rationally think it's in their best interest to defend their customs, their culture, their history, to defend America. Now, if you're following what's happening in Europe, this is going on before our very eyes. I don't know what communist influences are happening in Europe, but what you're seeing is something with this mass migration replacement theory, and where Europeans are being replaced by migrants who are brought there, and their customs, their culture, their history, their safety and well-being, all are being threatened and done away with. And there are people who are fighting against it, but there's also people who are there who are European citizens who are saying that it's okay, that they welcome this change. Remember, communism needs instability to take down a country. They also need loyal subjects who rely on them, who look to them, who worship them to keep this going. First stage, demoralization. And this involves the systemic undermining of a society's moral and ethical foundation. Bezmenov explained that this process usually takes 15 to 20 years, roughly the time needed to educate one generation. During this stage, foreign agents seek to infiltrate educational institutions, media, cultural platforms to influence the minds of young people. We're going to go more into detail about that the next episode. The goal is to instill a sense of disillusionment, moral relativism, and rejection of traditional values. It causes individuals to question their own cultural identity, history, and societal norms. This was in 1984 that he explained this. We're seeing this right now. We're seeing so many young people my age, who are so cynical at best about America and about our heritage, about our culture, about our history, a lot of them look at America with scorn or just absolute hatred. I heard it said, I think it was Matt Walsh explained that leftism teaches white people to hate their color, men to hate their gender, and Americans to hate their country. Something to that effect. This was intentional. Okay, this was the plan. The whole point is to create instability and set up for the next phase, which is destabilization. So once destabilization has taken root, you'll see weakening of essential institutions and structures from within society. Its aim is to create a feeling of insecurity and anxiety among the population, social unrest, political polarization, instability. This lays the groundwork for further manipulation. Enter the crisis stage. So at this point, there has been a breakdown of trust in institutions. There's heightened tension and chaos. I mean, are you thinking about 2020? Are you thinking about what it felt like back then? Things feel a lot better now, but back then it was very much like we were moving towards a breaking point. Something I had never seen in my lifetime. So once we get to that breaking point, Bezmenov explains that the last stage is normalization, where people just accept this new reshaped society and erase their original identity and values. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Jay, you have gone off the deep end. You've lost your mind. This is crazy, right? No one talks about this. How is this even real? Whatever. Now, I understand that. If you had told me 10 years ago that this would be a wormhole I would be going down, I would have thought you were crazy. If you had told me that it was Marxist communist influences in our country that have created this polarization that I have seen happen in real time in my lifetime, I would have just dismissed you and said, yeah, you're kind of crazy. But remember, the only privilege today, all this talk about privilege, the only privilege is growing up in our modern, cushy American society, which we all have enjoyed, maybe at varying levels, but to live in a land where we are free to think and believe and worship as we please is a huge privilege and blessing. To not worry about neighboring countries who are going to just roll through our borders and harm us or take over our nation, that's a huge blessing. We didn't worry about this growing up. We didn't have to imagine a world where there were people who wanted to see our nation destroyed. But that is very much the reality. Bezmenov actually addressed this himself. He said this.
He will create false illusions that the situation is under control. Situation is not under control. Situation is disgustingly out of control. Most of the American politicians, media, and educational system trains another generation of people who think they are living at a peacetime. False. The United States is in a state of war, undeclared total war against the basic principles and the foundations of this system. And the initiator of this war is not Comrade Andropov, of course. It's the system. However ridiculous it may sound, the world communist system or the world communist conspiracy, whether I scare some people or not, I don't give a hoot. If you are not scared by now, nothing can scare you.
Now, I don't pretend to understand everything on this chart, but when you look at it, you can see that there are things that most definitely have already happened. So, for example, education, right? The permissiveness and relativity, right? It's not so much cold, hard facts. It's, there's gender as a spectrum. You can be anywhere on the spectrum. It's fluid. Has anyone actually ever seen this spectrum under a microscope? No, it's just a feeling. That's what gender is. And if you see the results of that are ignorance, The media monopolize, manipulate, discredit. The result is a myopia. I had to look that word up. Myopia means lack of imagination, foresight, or intellectual insight. I think that very much describes what the media has done to our people. Culture, false heroes, role models. What's the result of that? Addictive fads. Look down here at the bottom under life where it says family and society. What's the method? It's to break up families because families are the foundation of a thriving society. Nuclear families are the foundation of a thriving society. So, what was the goal? Is to break them up. What's the result? No loyalty, right? If you don't have a family that you are loyal to, you will seek that elsewhere. Okay, I grew up in the 90s when gang activity was rampant, and it was very common understanding that kids and teenagers who were turning to gang activity came from broken homes. And what they found, this is based on what people said, what they found in the gang was a family. They found that family type atmosphere with the gang. We're seeing that right now. Okay, what do you think this LGBTQA plus B plus C crap is? Okay, it's this club, it's this family, right? They have clubs at schools for this stuff. You can go on the internet and join all these chats and rooms and groups, and you can be a part of this community. And what does this community tell you?
Toxic parents will always make it about them. This is what a toxic parent does. Toxic parents. I know exactly how your parents treated you. I love you very much. No contact with your family. If you need a new family, you're welcome here.
Your parents are bad. Your parents are backwards. They're old-fashioned. They're bigoted. They're oppressive. They don't embrace you, who you are, this identity.
That feels better.
And it creates this, well, now I'm loyal to this group over here and not my family. Health. Look at the health part, guys. Medicare, junk food, and what does that create? An enfeebled masses. Where is it? The society fiber and the law. I don't understand that fully. But you do see grassroots participation. All these protests we're seeing, these right now they are anti-Tesla, anti-Doge protests. They were pro-Palestinian protests. They were Black Lives Matter protests, okay? These are all organized. There's a lot of evidence that shows that this is not just a random group of people showing up. It's a group of people who are paid, who are being moved around the country to do these things. Anyways, so what is the result of this? It says it's mobocracy. Mobocracy. I had to look this word up too. That means controlled by a mob or mob rule. Yeah, we are seeing that today. I've put the full interview of Bezmenov's in the links below. I suggest you listen to it. Also, I've included an article by a woman named Ayan Hirsi Ali. You may recognize her. She's an activist, a journalist. She grew up in Somalia right after a Soviet-backed coup took over her country. Her family fled. She now lives in America. And she gives her best interpretation as to what this looks like right now, right? So she takes Bezmenov's plan that he laid out for what the Soviets are doing and explains how she sees that happening in real life. Now, I know, again, I know this sounds crazy. And if you've never even thought about this kind of stuff before, it blows your mind. But just have an open mind and open heart and recognize that Bezmenov lived through it. Ayan Hirsi Ali lived through it. You and I did not live through it, or at least to our knowledge that we know of. They lived through it. Hear what they have to say to explain what they are seeing in today's culture. Have a little humility and recognize that we don't know everything. And this is very much a possibility, very much a real thing. We're going to close with one more thing, and then we're going to get to our good news, our happy thought. This is a devotional given at BYU by Ezra Taft Benson in 1966. So he was not prophet at the time. I'm not sure what his calling was at the time, but he went on to become prophet and president of the church. So let's just listen to what he has to say.
I have talked face to face with the godless communist leaders. It may surprise you to learn that I was host to Mr. Khrushchev for a half day when he visited the United States. Not that I'm proud of it. I opposed his coming then, and I still feel it was a mistake to welcome this atheistic murderer as a state visitor. But according to President Eisenhower, Khrushchev had expressed a desire to learn something of American agriculture. And after seeing Russian agriculture, I can understand why. As we talked face to face, he indicated that my grandchildren would live under communism. After assuring him that I expected to do all in my power to assure that his and all other grandchildren will live under freedom, he arrogantly declared in substance, "You Americans are so gullible. No, you won't accept communism outright. But we'll keep feeding you small doses of socialism until you'll finally wake up and find you already have communism. We won't have to fight you. We'll so weaken your economy until you fall like overripe fruit into our hands."
Okay, that was heavy. It is. It's heavy. It weighs on your heart. It weighs on your mind. But what do we do when things are weighing on us? We look at our sphere of control and what we can do to initiate change, no matter how small in our life, that we can see we have some control in this crazy, chaotic world. So here at Go and Do, I like to educate. We've done that. I like to edify. We'll do that in a minute. And I also like to empower. So here's my Empower, Go and Do challenge. Ready? Make time to follow up and learn about current events. Make time to read, catch up on the news. Now, you may already be doing this, and that's great. You may be someone who shuns the news entirely because it is depressing, frustrating, chaotic, right? Things have gotten really petty these days. But it's still important to stay informed. Thomas Jefferson said that a well-informed citizenry is the best defense against tyranny. A well-informed citizenry is the best defense against tyranny. Now, if you're like me, you might be doing deep dives into the news and overdoing it, and then get overwhelmed, and then you have to take a break. Okay, I do that too. So my challenge to you is to find a reputable source and to schedule into your day or your week some time to catch up and stay informed. Okay, what's our edifying news? What's our happy thought? Well, I'm going to leave you with one more quote from Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov. Okay, he said this. He said, "The most difficult and at the same time the simplest answer to the subversion process." So he has an answer. Ready? He has an answer. He says it's difficult, but it's also simple. Okay, we're going to lean more on the simple part. Is to bring society back to religion. There you go. Bring society back to religion. I remember back in 2018 when President Nelson told the youth of the church that, this is what he said. He said, "You were sent to the earth at this precise time, the most crucial time in the history of the world, to help gather Israel." There was nothing more important than that. There was nothing of greater consequence. Absolutely nothing. Okay, so I heard that and I thought, yeah, okay, that sounds about right. Well, fast forward to 2020, and the world was going insane. There was a lot of religious persecution going on. This was still the case that he pushed. And I was kind of annoyed. I was like, how? I get growing Israel or gathering the kingdom, but there's so much more to focus on. Why aren't we doing that? Well, fast forward to now, I get it. I get what he's saying. There's nothing that's going to help this world, nothing's going to help our country than bringing the Spirit of Christ into it, bringing people closer to God so that they can feel of his light and his truth, and they can start to understand things and see truth and decipher between truth and lies and feel that love and spread that more. The gathering of Israel refers to bringing people into his church, but it also is bringing people closer to God. And you're already doing that. We're doing this daily. Okay. We go to church, we take care of our families. You're here, you're trying to learn. That's great. Okay. We need to keep doing that. We need to keep doing that with added commitment to first bring ourselves closer to God, and then our families, and then our communities, and then society at large. So if you're frustrated or overwhelmed and think, how do I stop this? What can we do to fight this? Strengthen your testimony. Strengthen your testimony. Grow close to God in a way that you never have before in your life. And you naturally will want to share. You'll naturally have a light that draws people, not to you, but to him. Thank you so much for being here. I'll see you next time.